Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, and no other coin design from history managed to be as popular or was copied as extensively as the silver coins of Alexander the Great. In particular, the designs for his silver coins, the types with Heracles in the lion skin headdress on the obverse and Zeus enthroned on the reverse. Some would argue the most important ancient coin design was the Athenian owl, but I would dare question this and say Alexander's coins managed to be even more impactful to the history of numismatics. And despite what the fights in the comment section of my videos might say, despite us arguing endlessly about whether a king from the past was a hero or a villain, there's one highly pragmatic bit of reality that something as conservative as money exposes to us. That is that if a particular coin type, a particular piece of design was put on a coin, if it was struck and then copied for centuries by many different peoples without any significant changes to the design, that tells us something important. It means the design inspired trust. It means it was intrinsically connected to the mental image people back then had when they heard about money, and therefore, whoever first came up with that design and made it popular, that person was certainly very important. You know what? I'm actually curious. Which type of coin you think is the most influential to the history of money? Do you think it's the Athenian owl or the Alexander Heracles? Let me know in the comment section down below. So, back to the Alexander here. I mean, the man certainly had quite a big ego. He claimed to be a direct descendant of Heracles, just like his predecessors, and by the end of his reign, he openly proclaimed his divine nature to his subjects. You know, when you conquer a gigantic empire by age 32, that has a tendency of elevating your own self-worth. But I wonder if even someone important like Alexander, if he would have imagined that this coin he introduced meant to fully integrate and monetize all of the peoples under his rule, some of which were very new to the use of coins as money, if he knew that his coins would continue to be made for centuries after his death, not only struck by centuries, but across borders, not only by Greeks, because not only they issued Alexander types, but all across the Mediterranean, other peoples recognized these images and associated it with the concept of money, making their own imitations and establishing one of the first, and I would argue the most important, international currencies. So in today's video, let me share with you some lovely examples of this famous type, starting with pieces from just a few years after Alexander's death, when people didn't even dare to touch any of the design elements of the originals, to centuries later by peoples beyond the frontiers of the Greek world. Today's coins belong to a friend of the channel, Michal Prusak from Poland, who so kindly filmed me his lovely collection. Make sure to follow him on Instagram at Poliorketis Ancient Coins. And if you have an interesting collection of ancient coins and would like to have them featured on the channel, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter so we can keep in touch. The link is in the pinned comment. Who knows, your coin might be featured in a future episode. Alright, let's look at some pretty coins. The first coin of today illustrates probably like the shock that people must have felt with Alexander's death at just 32 years old, right at the pinnacle of his power. It's not that this particular coin we have here has any special visual features to it. It is yet another Tetradrachm that looks very similar to any other coins issued during his lifetime. In fact, this particular coin is from the city of Amphipolis, one of the most prolific of Alexander's lifetime mints, in his homeland of Macedon. The special thing here is actually that the design did not change. As soon as Alexander's body turned cold, his generals began fighting for pieces of his empire, but they wouldn't dare touch the design of the coins. How curious. The differences between these early posthumous coins and the lifetime pieces is quite a complicated subject. I've made a video teaching you how to distinguish if your Alexander coin is actually lifetime or posthumous, but it generally had to do with minor stylistic differences on the coins and a mix of the archaeological dating of different treasures. But it's odd to think that by the time this coin was made, with this Alexandro or of Alexander on the reverse that we can read here, powerful generals were purging the rest of Alexander's bloodline and claiming power to themselves. So despite issuing coins on his name, they were like purging his bloodline. It's counterintuitive. It's kind of morbid, isn't it? If I was purging the old political order and establishing my own dynasty, one of the first things I would change would be the image on money. This just illustrates how conservative money was. It's likely that these images were so tightly connected to the idea of money that any changes could risk a crisis of trust on the currency. For our second piece, we have yet another coin made just a few years after Alexander's death. This one was made between 310 and 301 BC by one of his successors, Antigonos Monophthalmus. Here we have a smaller drachma, so this piece was 1/4 of the previous coin. And as we can see here as well, despite the fact Alexander was already dead for a good 20 years before this coin was made, nobody dared to change the design on coins. Once more, he was too fresh in public memory for someone to dare touch anything established by this living legend. And that's something major in this case, because there were plenty of very ambitious men amongst his successors. They must have seen the potential of aggrandizing themselves on coinage, but many didn't dare to do it, at least initially. In fact, if there was someone who deserved the authority to advertise his image on coins, I think that person would be Antigonus here. There's no other way to put it. The man was a badass. He was one of Alexander's toughest lieutenants. He lost an eye in battle, hence his name, Monophthalmos, the one-eyed in Greek. Just the fact he didn't have like a horrible death to some infection shows his immune system was alone already superhuman. He then pledged unilaterally to reunite Alexander's empire, and it took an entire coalition of other successors kings to stop him. He wouldn't go down without a fight, though. He didn't die from some petty assassination plot. He died on the front lines when he was 81 years old. Wow! And the history surrounding his death is also legendary. No one had the bronze balls to face him head on, because according to the records, he only fell when an entire section of the enemy front line targeted him specifically with their javelins. Godspeed, Antigonus, what a beast. We have to go a little bit further in time to 282 BC for this third coin to finally see someone daring to change the images on the coins to fit their political agenda. Imagine that, 40 years after Alexander's passing. It took that long. What we have here is yet another Tetradrachm struck by Seleucus I, founder of the Seleucid Empire, by far the largest of Alexander's successor states. The Seleucids would later on establish a marvelous numismatic tradition. Out of all of the successor kingdoms, they had the biggest numbers of different portraits made. This was partly due to the number of civil wars and usurpers that rose and fell amongst the Seleucids. So this led to this diversity of portraits, as each claimant wanted to issue coins with their own portrait. At least this led to the indirect consequence of the Seleucids becoming amazing at making different faces of people. However, as we can see here, at least in the very beginning, they were conservative with their designs. There's no changes in portraits. Seleucus did issue some special coins with his portrait, but the majority of his mints kept making coins in the Alexander style. And as we can see here, the obverse is it's basically indistinguishable from those from previous decades. It's quite a compact flan. I'm always impressed when handling these coins because the sheer weight of this coin, 17 grams, it feels incompatible with the small diameter. It's like there's a disconnect between how small the coin looks in one's hand against how much it weighs. You only have to turn the coin sideways to see it. It is incredibly thick. But as we go to the reverse, we finally find some design changes that reflect Seleucus meddling with the message. We still have Zeus, the ultimate Greek symbol of authority. The Seleucids would later on change the reverse to Apollo, their patron god, but these first issues kept using Zeus. And now he holds a small Nike, the goddess of victory, on his hand, rather than the eagle. And at the bottom and the right areas of the design, now instead of Alexandro, we can read Basileus Seleuco, meaning of King Seleucus. Seleucus' successor, Antiochus, would revolutionize the coinage, would change the design on Seleucid coins a lot, but at least we can see for his father, he was much more tactful with the choice of design. So let's keep going and let's do a big jump in time. Let's go to the 2nd century BC. This is such a fascinating coin. 2 centuries after the death of Alexander, yet here is a Greek city still issuing coins in his name. This Tetradrachm was struck between 175 and 125 BC in Mesembria. Mesembria was located in a somewhat fringe region at the edge of Thrace, but despite their location, far removed from the epicenters of Greek life, this city-state, this polis, fairly active in the trade around the Black Sea, they had to do business with merchants from lots of different places. So the most pragmatic thing to do was to adopt a coinage, a design on coinage that was recognized by everyone at this larger Greek sphere. Therefore, they just went with the Alexander-style Tetradrachma. And they issued them also in the Attic standard, the weight that was established by Alexander. Fairly pragmatic solution on their part. They knew the merchants who traded with them were familiar with the type, and the distant markets that brought and sold from them, they used coins in this Attic standard, so they just went with it, they just went conservative. I wonder if there was also a little bit of a political side to it, because you see, cities in the edges of the so-called civilized Greek world, they might have been afraid of being considered quote-unquote barbaric by the rest of the Greek sphere. So maybe this was also a move on Mesembria to show they were just as Greek as cities like Athens or Corinth. Design-wise, this is a fairly unique Heracles we have here. He looks a bit puffy on his face, different from the ultra-muscular version from the earlier issues. And the skin of the Nemean lion has this really cool texture to it, which, at least for me, it looks more like scales than strands of fur, which is what the original design was supposed to show. I like the uniqueness in this. It is also fairly thinner and larger compared to the earlier coins. Remember, I mentioned the earlier Tetradrachma were super thick. These late Hellenistic coins are super large, around 30 millimeter wide generally, so they offer this really nice canvas for the design, although they don't have the same crazy high relief from the earlier pieces. On the reverse, Zeus has changed significantly as well. It seems like the king of the gods has been neglecting his exercise routine because he is significantly less muscular compared to the previous coins. He looks rather skinny, in fact. But, I mean, design-wise, it's all still here, with some very minor changes. In fact, no changes, other than just the engraving style. Everything is still here. Zeus is sitting on his throne after 200 years. He's carrying his scepter, he has his ego, everything like the original. The legends are also consistent with the earlier designs. Once again, we can read Alexandro Basileus. The issues made at Mesembria and other independent city-states sometimes carried the name of the local magistrate responsible for the mint when the coin was made. In this particular case, it doesn't have a name, sadly, so we can't name the specific officer responsible for making this coin, but we can see a couple of letters, Delta and Alpha, next to Zeus's knee. So I guess these are the initials of whoever made these. It's fascinating to think that the Hellenistic world could be somewhat described as this kind of pseudo-globalized space. imagine this enormous geographical zone from Greece to the Black Sea down to Egypt, all the way to like the Middle East and the borders of India, the area Alexander originally conquered. Despite this area being fairly fragmented, the kingdoms of the Hellenistic world were often at war with each other, they still operated in a Greek cultural framework between them. They shared a common Greek language used in trade and politics, which functioned pretty much as a lingua franca, and they had common cultural symbols, which included those established by Alexander, like the ones from his coinage. Of course, this didn't mean this gigantic area was culturally homogeneous. You couldn't just go back and forth between countries like an European goes around Europe, for example. Back then, if you spoke Greek, but you went to the Seleucid Empire and you wanted to partake in public life, first of all, they wouldn't allow you because you weren't a citizen, but also because you would have to know Aramaic or Babylonian as well. If you went to Egypt, once again, not a citizen, and if you wanted to speak with the local peoples, you would probably have to know Demotic. But at least if you were a Hellene, like a Greek, an ethnic Greek, if you knew how to speak Greek, you at least had some access to the ruling strata of these societies. And of course, it would have been essential to command the Greek language in order to do long-distance commerce. The popularity of the Heracles and Zeus coins was so significant that it served as inspiration for other peoples. I've got a few examples to show you. Let's start by the Carthaginians. Now, Carthage often employed mercenaries in the wars, and since these guys came from all sorts of different regions that used different kinds of coins, this forced Carthage to be remarkably flexible when it came to coin production. Depending on where these mercenaries came from, they produced coins of the weight standard they were used to. So, for example, if mercenaries came from the local Carthaginian domains, they were paid with the local Punic weight standard. If they were Greek, they would issue these guys Greek-style coins in Greek weights. But they went a step further. They didn't just make the coins of the weight that was most suitable to the mercenaries they were hiring. They also changed the imagery on the coins in order to increase the likelihood that these soldiers would accept the coins as payment and fight with Carthage. Here we have an example of a coin used to pay for Greek mercenaries, used to native Greek weight standards. This is yet another Tetradrachm, issued in the same weight standard as the original Alexander types. And as we can see on the obverse, it has the exact same design, despite being a Carthaginian coin. The Carthaginians typically placed the goddess Tanit on their coins, but in order to pay the Greeks, they went with the more familiar, more recognizable Heracles obverse. This coin was issued at around 300 BC in Entella, a city in western Sicily, occupied by the Carthaginians. It's crazy to think that this coin was made by Carthaginians to pay for Greek mercenaries that were going to be fighting against other Greeks. On the reverse, however, they applied a Carthaginian symbol instead. We have a horse with a palm tree to its right, two very common symbols Carthage placed on their coins. In this particular example, the inscriptions in Punic script below the horse were left off the flan. This coin was struck slightly off-center, but if it was here, it would have read something like, "From the people of the camp," or "From the camp mint," showing these specific coins were made specifically for the payment of mercenaries. It's interesting how this is like a 50-50, like a bicultural coin. It has a fully Greek side placed there to make the recipients more comfortable with receiving this coin as payment, but also had a purely Punic side, showing who was making the coin. Other peoples who often drew inspiration on Greek coins were the Celts. To the north of the Greek mainland, the Danube Celts, who lived in what is roughly modern-day countries like Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, they conducted trade and worked as mercenaries for the Greeks, and they were paid with Greek coins. coins that they brought back to their native lands, they circulated there, and they also served as prototypes for their own, later, native Celtic coins. You might have seen these super abstract-looking Celtic pieces, and these are fruit of centuries of copying of the Greek original prototypes. But what we have here today is fascinating. This is a very early Celtic copy, which still retains most of the original Greek designs. I love comparing these earlier pieces to the originals to see like where exactly does the corruption of the original designs begins to appear. The obverse tends to be quite resistant to corruption. This one in particular has so little abstraction that this must have been like a super early piece. I would personally put this one around like the early 2nd century BC, maybe even late 3rd century. And we can see that it follows the original super closely. This example was struck on a wide flan compared to the compact earlier pieces, and we can see like the lion's headdress, Heracles' face, it all looks incredibly similar to the originals. The lips on Heracles, however, the lips and the nose, these call my attention. If you ever had to draw a portrait, you know how hard it is to draw lips correctly. It's so relatable to see that the die engravers had the same problem I personally had when drawing faces. They just replaced the fine curvature of the lips with like a series of dots. You can see like the tip of the nose and the nostril, this area, it has become just like 2 dots, and the upper lip is one larger and one smaller dots connected by a line, and the lower lip, it's just a single dot. I guess I am connected with my forefathers in sucking at drawing. Heading to the reverse, it's all still quite nicely rendered, but here we start seeing some of the corruption of the design becoming more noticeable. That's because the reverse had a lot more visual elements that required a certain knowledge of the Greek language and the Greek culture in general, which the Celtic engraver that made this coin most certainly didn't have. The image of the seated Zeus is actually pretty nicely rendered, although his head looks a little bit too large and disproportional in relation to the rest of his body. Maybe the throne he's sitting on doesn't follow the typical style of the Greek prototypes, but that's me nitpicking really, because it's still fairly well done. However, if we look at the couple of symbols to the left of Zeus, below the eagle, there are 2 symbols here, right? On the originals, these are monograms. They were made by combining different letters of the Greek alphabet, and they made these monograms, right? And they were there to identify like the issuing city and the magistrates responsible for the production of this coin. Sort of like a quality control thing. And we can see here that the Celtic engraver tried to copy them without knowing what the letters meant. And it led to these wonderfully intricate symbols that have completely lost their original functionality. Now they don't represent anything. They have just become this lovely but ultimately useless ornamentation on the coin. On the right and lower parts of the design, the original legends, Basileus Philippo of King Philip, showed that the original prototype of this coin was a Tetradrachm issued under Philip III, Alexander's half-brother. It's all still fully legible, the engraver managed to replicate them successfully, but there are a few hints that, once more, that indicate he might not have known how to write in Greek. The last letters of the word Basileus, in the lower part of the coin, the letters epsilon, omega, sigma, they have become like a distorted omega between 2 brackets, showing the engraver didn't know what the letters were supposed to mean and he was just copying the shape. Fascinating. I wish I could track down a few later iterations of the design to see when was the point where the design just became illegible for a Greek speaker. And here we have it, centuries after the fall of Alexander, and his coins carried on, becoming essentially the dollar of the ancient world, a coin that was pretty much accepted everywhere. Which coin do you think should have this title of the dollar of the ancient world? Let us know in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.